the one and only Erik Erlendsson. I like that hoodie, buddy.
USF, baby.
All day, every day. Go Bulls. I know you were sharing what I had to say. I wanted to get your opinion on that because I thought it was very interesting when I was bringing that up to Brian because I was asking, this was a couple of weeks ago, about the growth of Jon Cooper. What have you seen? Because obviously you've been here longer than he has, but what's the greatest growth that you've seen in him as a head coach, going from a guy that really had some success in the minors, but now is going to go down as maybe one of the best coaches in hockey history and a certain Hall of Famer?
Probably his understanding of bench management, right? And why and how that matters. I mean, look, they have great players. They've had great players since he's been here, but you do have to know how to utilize them, put them in the best positions to succeed. And I think that he's learned that as he's come along because, you know, if you think about it, it was a little bit of a rapid rise for Jon in some ways, right? I mean, you know, but he did pick up things every step along the way. You know, you're going all the way back to the, you know, the Texarkana days and even the Little Caesars days and, you know, youth hockey in Michigan and, you know, to the Green Bay Gamblers and to Norfolk. You know, I mean, you think about the steps that he's made along the way. He always had instant success, right? And in some ways, he had that here. His first full year, the team made the playoffs, got swept, and by year 2, he's in the Stanley Cup final. So it was a rapid rise in terms of, you know, the success that he had. But I think he's been able to become much, much better in everything he does because of all those experiences that he's had to learn how to use his players. And to, I mean, you mentioned it. I mean, we know that his greatest strength has always been player management. And that's, I think, an important part of any coach at any sport nowadays. You can't just be a coach. You have to be a player manager as well. And I think he's one of the best at it. But he has learned to be a better a guy who manages his bench in games, right? We're seeing this year in particular, like what sticks out to me is how many times have we seen Luke Glendening thrown out in situations where he wouldn't be out there, but because he's such a good face-off guy,
right?
You know, to put him out there. I don't know if Coop would have done that earlier in his career. I think what you're finding as he's learned through his career is that those small moments could lead to something big. And, you know, the win they had in Nashville the day after Thanksgiving on Black Friday was that type of a thing. It was a power play in overtime, and he sent Glendening out for the faceoff. They won the faceoff. 5 seconds later, puck's in the back of the net. They win the game and pick up, at that time, that was 2 important points. So I think that's a big part of how he has evolved as a coach, is understanding how to deal with those situations and manage his bench a lot better. And look, you can't help but become better at X's and O's, especially with some of the people he's had around. I mean, all those years he spent with Rick Bowness. I mean, Rick Bowness he's Mr. Hockey. He's been around the game for 50 years at a high level. So you are definitely going to pick up on, but I think for me in watching him, I think it's the way he manages his bench in game.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you this too before we got back to the Lightning. I had Mark Topkin on before, and people always ask me about the importance of being on site to cover these games, right? And you know, you've done it both, right? You were traveling with the team there for a while with the Trib. You know, you cover the games at home too. We've traveled together and covered playoff games. So, what type of insight do you get from being there every day that you couldn't get from home? Because I guess people would ask me, and maybe it's a little bit different when you're a journalist, when you're a writer, than somebody that was in the radio and podcast field like myself. But people would ask me, Jay, why do you go to the games all the time? And does it really make that much of a difference? Can you do your job without going to the games? And, you know, this kind of goes into like the Stephen A. LeBron thing where Stephen A. would say, well, I don't need to go to the games, but to talk about you, I can do that from here. But I think there's something like you get a little bit, and I'm not just talking about like one-on-one conversations, because I think that's like, obviously you get one-on-one conversations from going there, but there's just something different about being at the games and at practices and around the arena. Could you speak to some of that just kind of randomness and just intangible stuff by being around there and how that can help you do your job better than if you were just kind of watching every single game at home on your couch?
How long is this podcast?
Right.
There are so many benefits to being there in person. First of all, when you just watch stuff on TV, all you see is what the TV shows you, right? Especially in hockey, like just from watching a game standpoint. I mean, how many times have we, I don't know, seen a guy take a puck off of a boot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you watch, okay, is he staying on the bench? Oh no, he's going down the tunnel. You know, you might not get that on TV. And that's just a small thing.
Oh, and let me cut you up. That becomes one of the funnest things in the press box when it's it's me, Eric, and Ed, and the chief is next to us, and then all of a sudden we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We start counting
heads,
and we start looking at the tunnel. The guy walking down, we see Mikey Poirier walking down and walking back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or so. Like it's so funny how 3 grown men all of a sudden just start putting their counting fingers on. So I think they're a guy short. Oh wait, there's a guy in the box. Oh wait, there's it's crazy. It's hilarious.
Yeah. So you know, you're probably not going to have an opportunity to get that like watching just on television. For me though, like you can never get a feel for a game unless you're at the game. Mm-hmm. Like you can't. You know, the tone of what's going on. It's like one of the reasons I love talking to Brian Engblom sometimes is because he gets that on ice vantage point, right? He's down there between the benches and he has a much different feel for the game, but you still have to be at the game to have a feel for it. And that's even upstairs. And even from just sort of tactically looking at games, you know, from where we sit up in the press box, you have a view of the entire ice. So you can kind of see stuff that, again, is not showing up on a camera that's going on behind the play, you know, whether it's, you know, their defensive zone setup or anything like that. So number one, you get a much better feel for the game when you're there actually seeing it with your own eyes and not viewing it through a lens. But for me, the biggest thing always has been and always will be the opportunity to be in the room, to speak to players, to speak to coaches, ask your questions, and then you get insight into the game. We can talk strategies and X's and O's, and those are not the difficult parts of figuring this out. But when you get into the mindset of a player, what'd you see here? What'd you think here? What'd you feel here? You know, you get it from their perspective. That helps you become somebody who better understands what it is you're watching, and you connect the two. And then on top of that, you build a little bit of a rapport with the players. They get to know you. They get to see your questions. They see how you operate and how you work. Mm-hmm. And then, especially shoes, you know, and it just gives you, because then there's a bit of a trust built up, because there is more of a barrier, especially nowadays, between media and players than there ever has been in the history of sports, right? There's so much out there that players have to be wary of when dealing with us in the media. So I think them getting to know you, not necessarily on a personal basis, there's some of that, but get to know how you go about your work and your job and what it is you do. You might get much, much better information and insight from a guy who kind of gives you a little bit of trust that you're not going to take something and turn it into a headline that's going to make them look bad. And I think that helps everybody, right? Mm-hmm. That helps us, because I think the one thing that gets lost in today's media is, in a lot of ways, we are the conduit between fans and teams and players, right? If we're asking questions, there's a good chance the fans want to know the answers. Right. So it benefits everybody when there is more media around that can kind of build up that trust and rapport with the players, so that fans, ultimately we're there to serve the fans, get a better insight into what it is they're watching that goes beyond just the scores. Who scored a goal? What was the final score? Where are they in the standings? There's just so much more insight that you can get from being at games that you can't get. And look, I cover every game. Half of them are on the road, half of them are at home. right? There's a big difference. There's times where, man, I wish I was on the road because there's questions that I want to ask from a game that I can't ask, right? So I can't get that kind of insight because I'm not there to ask those questions. That's not a knock on anybody else. That's just from my own selfish standpoint. So I miss that aspect of being able to do this job in person, embedded basically with the team. And I think that benefits readers, listeners, everybody, that we can get those insight because we're around them all the time.
I don't know if you saw, but Gary Bettman spoke today, and he said that, no, I'm not changing the playoff format. And I was like, God dang it. We were just talking to Coop about this. It's going to come down to the wire here in the Atlantic E when you're looking at these three teams with the Bolts and the Leafs and the Panthers. And it starts, obviously, tomorrow night. This is kind of a tricky 3-game stretch, isn't it? I mean, you go play Dallas. These games could either be really tight checking against Dallas, or Dallas just takes off. This has been such a weird visit for the Bolts over the years. You have to be on your P's and Q's earlier. It can get out of hands. And then you have that double dip with Utah and Vegas. I think if they want to have any chance to really stay in the hunt here in the Atlantic, they got to win 2 of 3. What do you make of these next couple of games?
I think it's a fair assessment if they want to stay in contention. I mean, Florida's opened the door, right?
Yeah.
They blew that third period lead against the Bruins last week. They blew a 2-goal lead against the Islanders the other night and lost both those games of regulation. And the thing is, too, to kind of show the importance of getting the points on this trip, the Panthers and Leafs still have 2 more head-to-head matchups against each other.
Right.
One of those 2 teams is guaranteed 2 points out of those games, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of also what you're chasing here. So it's a 2-point gap with 1 game in hand, and one the Lightning and Panthers have 1 more head-to-head. The Lightning and Leafs have 1 more head-to-head. So there's still 2 matchups between these 2 teams. But if you start to, if you go on a streak, just like even last week, they go 0-1-2 or 0-2-1,
yeah,
and you only pick up, 1 point here or there, it could be the difference, at this point. And, we've talked about the importance of, where you finish, I think, in the standings this year compared to maybe other years where I think home ice matters more for Tampa Bay this year. And then if you finish first in the division, you're getting number 2 wild card. It looks like that's going to be Ottawa, the way things are trending. But, you get that on home ice, and, I think that matters a lot. So I'm with you. It's a tricky trip. Dallas, I think, has won 7 straight at home. Right. So they're playing, pretty well. They had to come back last night against the Ducks to win that game in overtime. Utah, they got punked by Edmonton 7-1. So they have another game tomorrow night. We'll see what they kind of have in the tank as they try and chase a playoff spot. And, Vegas has been a difficult place to go and play, and it's going to be the second half of a back-to-back, and we'll see which start Johansson gets, whether it's Saturday or whether it's Sunday. In this back-to-back situation. But yeah, I think you need to look at it realistically as 4 points needs to kind of keep you in the conversation for the top seed in the Atlantic Division. I'm with you there.
If they win the first game against Dallas, do you think that impacts who plays that first game of the back-to-back?
No.
Or is it already planned out?
I think it's already planned out. They won't tell us.
No, of course not.
Jon Cooper will never tell us, but I think it's already mapped out. And I wouldn't be surprised if Johansson gets Saturday's game in Utah.
No chance Vasi plays both, right?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he did it obviously in February, but that was with the break coming up.
Yeah.
And Johansson was hurt. Their backup at that time was Brandon Halverson. So I would not expect that Vasi would start both. I'm pretty sure Johansson's going to get one of them, just like Johansson started the game last week in Philadelphia. You can't let him sit for too long, and this is the last back-to-back coming up on the season. And actually, once you get past this weekend, other than the 30th and the 31st, it's every other day for the rest of the regular season. So that leads all the way up to the 17th of April. So, I think it's pre-planned out. I think they probably have it mapped out for the most part the rest of the season.
What can you tell us from practice today as far as the lines? And, have we seen enough from a guy like Oliver Bjorkstrand? I mean, we probably got to wait the standard 10 games like we have to wait for everybody. But I think Yanni's been, as advertised. I still think Ollie's trying to find his way. What can you tell us from practice and how the lines were looking and your initial takeaways from Oliver Bjorkstrand with the Bolts?
Yeah, so it looks like same lines as they've been running, right? With Kucherov playing with Hagel and Sorelli the last couple of games, and Yanni Gourde playing with Point and Gensel. That's kind of the way it's been. Third line has been Paul, Gonsalves, and Bjorkstrand. Still waiting to see when and if we get Sorelli, Hagel, Bjorkstrand. I think that was probably the thought process when they made that trade. Haven't seen it yet outside of practice. Defensive pairings all the same. So everybody was there. That was the good thing that nobody missed practice today after a day off yesterday. So everybody should be good to go starting tomorrow in Dallas. As far as Bjorkstrand, some guys just take a little bit longer to adjust, right? And this is a new situation for him. He's in season trade. The only other time he was moved was in the summer. So he's trying to just find some of the nuances and fit in. It's, as easy as tight and sometimes as tight as that locker room is, like Bjorkstrand's the outsider, right?
Yeah.
Yanni Gourde's not. He knows most of those players in that room in some capacity and played with a good portion of them. So, he's not an outsider coming in. He's a former guy coming back.
Right.
So Bjorkstrand is still kind of the outsider. And he's got certainly a big ally in Gourde with him. And, he's certainly got a really good personality. But, when I wrote the story last week about the importance of chemistry and when new guys get traded in, trying to make them feel as welcome as possible when they come in, like Brandon Hagel was great talking on this subject because he went through it. His first time he'd ever been traded in any capacity in his life. He knew nobody in that room.
Do you remember that day? Do you remember that day? I don't know why, like out of all the things I've done in the last decade, watching him that day in locker room B in there, he looked so disheveled and so like, I don't know what the hell just happened. And I felt so bad asking this guy about hockey when he had his whole world just got flipped upside down. It's just like it burned in my brain.
Yep. And the one thing he said that really stood out to me, he said, the hockey community is a small community, and he still didn't know anybody in that room. In any capacity, never played with anybody, never worked out with anybody, nothing. So it was completely new. So, when your life gets turned upside down, certainly you're here to do a job, but he struggled to make that adaptation, right, to a completely new situation for him. And, he was very insightful in how all of that works and trying to develop chemistry with a new team and new teammates. And he said, sometimes you have to have off ice situations to really, and this is the one thing that really caught me too, was he said hockey players by nature don't want to step on anybody's toes. So in a locker room situation, they might be more hesitant to maybe speak up, to ask a question, whatever it is, to anybody, right? That's just the nature of the sport. He said sometimes you need the off-ice stuff. You go out to dinner, maybe you have a couple drinks at a bar on the road, something like that, that kind of helps with it. So you kind of even get some insight into how all that takes place. And, they've only had the one road trip really since the trade was made. This will be another opportunity here, with a couple of days off, including a new experience going to Salt Lake City for a hockey game for these players. Although I guess Bjorkstrand and Gourde have probably already been there.
They played there, right?
But for the rest of the team, it'll be new. So it'll be a shared experience in that aspect. So it just does sometimes take guys a little bit longer to kind of figure out where they fit in the new hierarchy, right? You went from a very familiar setting where he'd been for a couple of years to now coming on a team that has expectations. That Seattle team, I know they made the playoffs that one year, but there's no expectations other than trying to live up to Vegas, the standards that Vegas set as an expansion team. They didn't have those type of pressures. So now he comes into a team in a locker room that has Stanley Cup aspirations and has had a great season as one of the top teams in the league, especially in the second half of the season. So it just sometimes it'll click with him, though. I really think it'll click with him. He's going to figure it out. I know that 10-game marker is sort of the standard we kind of set aside and see where they sit after 10 games. Obviously, he's not there yet. And again, this is not a one-year investment. This is not a 20-game investment. He's under contract for next year. But I have full confidence that Oliver Bjorkstrand is going to be a big part of whatever it is this team does this year once you get to the postseason.
Team is at the airport right now, ready to take off for Dallas. So really good that they were able to get some time here at the house.
Good practice today, though. It was a good practice today. Like,
were you there?
Yeah. It was out.
Oh,
It was out in Brandon, so
yeah,
right down the street from my house. It's even better.
Nice.
But I mean, like the one thing that Coop talked about today too. You look at the way they played in Boston on Saturday, and one of the best periods I've ever seen a team play when you out attempt a team 42-3. He talked about how they had a good practice the day before. They didn't practice the day before Philadelphia. They actually flew back from Boston on Sunday and played that game. Well, today they had wasn't quite as hard as an intense practice as it was in Boston on Friday, but it was, for a fly out day, they went about an hour, 15 hour and 20 minutes on the ice, which is a little bit long, to be on the ice before you. So good practice. Hopefully you can't expect a performance like you had in Boston, once again, but hopefully that's kind of something that spurs them, for tomorrow's game against Dallas.
Before I let you go, how about the performances from the guys involved with the Four Nations? Have you noticed any trickle-down effect? We've seen them taking some off days, right? Optional reports to the rink kind of things. Like, how do you think that they've adjusted, and have you seen any after effects?
I think you look at a lot of the guys around the league, I think a lot of them are.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Connor McDavid had a tough time, when he came back with Edmonton. Matthew Tkachuk obviously is injured.
Right.
Brady Tkachuk, I think he might be the exception. He's kind of really led the charge for Ottawa here since they came back. But specifically with the Lightning, Braden Point does not look as explosive with his skating as we're used to seeing. He's not attacking with the puck that we're used to seeing from him. I don't know if that's a reaction to that. Brandon Hagel had some good results. Like, he scored a couple of big goals coming out of the break. You think of some of the shots that he had, and but you haven't seen the same type of energy, so to speak. The same, like his goal celebrations. Like, even his goal celebrations by his standards are tame. Right? Like, he's a guy who plays with such emotion on his sleeve, and we haven't seen that eruption of emotion from him. And look, I mean, he talked about it. It was difficult going from the emotion of those 2 weeks to come back and have to play NHL games. Not that there's not emotion in it, but it hasn't been the same. It was nice to see Cirelli get on the scoreboard there in Boston with a couple of goals. That's going to help him. Jake Gensel. Look, he snapped at the linesman the other night. He's such an easygoing guy. I don't know exactly, but obviously you could see from watching the replay that
he got penalized for it.
He turned back as soon as the face-off happened and just immediately got on the linesman case. And that's not something he's a steady, unassuming, quiet personality, quiet on the ice in terms of the way he plays. He obviously scores big goals, but so for him to erupt with that kind of emotion was a little out of character for him. So I know that certainly that's been some of the talk of some of these guys coming out of the Four Nations. That's why, playing these type of tournaments in season are tricky, right? They're very tricky. We loved it. It was great entertainment. It was great theater in all of those games, but it does take an emotional drain. I don't think physically that tournament was a big deal for these players, because most of them only played 3 and only a few of them played 4, right? It's in 2 weeks. So it's not like it was, a jam-packed schedule. So I think the emotional level, and sometimes it's kind of hard to get that back. But, I think once we hit April on the calendar, I think you need to start seeing more of that from some of those guys that were in the Four Nations. You need that emotion at a time that's very emotional for teams. So,
what do you got up on lightninginsider.com right now, buddy?
Obviously the recap from the game the other night, working on a couple of things, the playoff format. That's something that I've kind of talked to some guys about. And while Gary Bettman might not have an appetite to change it, I think there's a growing sense
everybody
from inside the
else
league, from the players and coaches and everything else, who are a little bit, over this situation and have a thought process to go back to a more 1 through 8 as a more fair, quote unquote, fair seeding situation. So working on that a little bit, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to get that up, but that is something that's brewing in the back of my mind. It'll be up on the site at some time, I don't know, soon.
LightningInsider.com. Use that promo code JNZ. Get $10 off, not just this season, but every recurring one after that. Yeah, I wonder what I was gonna say. I was gonna say Sheldon Keefe. He ain't there no more. Craig Brubake's probably not the best person to ask, but I think Paul Maurice would be interesting to see what he has to say too, right? Like, because I'm sure they're in that same situation. Like, damn, bro, we're gonna have to play the Lightning in the first round again.
Yeah.
Like, no, who wants to sign up for that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been good for the state of Florida to get these teams facing off in the playoffs, but I'm over it.
Yeah,
I'm over it. I'm over seeing the same two teams in the postseason. Because I just don't think it drums up enough interest. Because at that point, especially with this one, it becomes geographical, right? Is the rest of the league paying attention to Florida and Tampa Bay? Sure, they're two of the best teams, but they're still two of the smaller markets. So is the rest of the NHL community going to focus in on that matchup over, say, whoever Edmonton is playing?
right.
You know, so I'm over the format. I'd like to see it go back to 1 to 8.
I'm with you, buddy. LightningInsider.com. Again, use that promo code JNZ. Follow him on Twitter/X. Erik _Erlendsson. That's a K, not a C. 2 S's after the D. Appreciate it, brother. Have a great weekend. Talk to you next Wednesday.
All right. Be well.
Thanks, pal.